Hi, welcome to Sacred and Unfiltered, a roots and remedy podcast where the truth doesn't need a filter and healing isn't always pretty. We're here to speak spirit, boundaries, self-worth with softness, strength, and always unfiltered. Let's get real, let's get rooted. So, in my last podcast, we talked about the art of breaking down and how beautiful it is and everything that we have to go through with doing that. And one of the things that I brought up in that conversation was talked about anger and rage and all of those things and how we deal with it and how we handle it and everything else. So, um, the one thing that we have to remember is anger is a spiritual boundary, it's not a flaw. So, what I mean by that is anger is like a messenger and it's not a monster. It anger shows us your values, your needs, your boundaries, and when they've been crossed. It's your spirit saying something here is not in alignment. We're not dealing with things. Something's wrong. Something's amiss. We need to talk about what that really means and how it affects us and how that plays a role in our life because uh, when it comes to getting angry and when it comes to being angry and dealing with anger, you have to realize that there are two types of anger. There's sacred anger and there's reactive anger. And by that, what I mean is first we'll look at like reactive anger. It's in the heat of the moment. It's explosive. It's unchecked. It seeks to do harm or gain control. So it's always the reaction to whatever just happened. Where sacred anger is more rooted. It's clear. It's directional. It protects and honors the truth, your truth, the truth that's being misaligned or being triggered to be in that angry state. And so the difference is the conscious expression versus the unconscious reaction. And by what I mean by that is think about when we're first put in that moment of anger, we get very reactive. Like, what the hell? What did I do? What is going on? These are all common reactions to, things that have gone wrong, things that have angered us, be it from, a situation or something someone said. We get very visceral in our reaction towards people where, our when we talk about doing a sacred, more rooted anger, it's very clear. We understand why our anger is the way it is. We know where to direct this anger at because sometimes we don't, when we get reactive and we don't know where that anger is coming down from or where it needs to be expressed out to, we have to, the, we have to go within ourselves and feel that anger and realize where we need to direct that anger and feel if that anger that we feel really needs to have a reaction to it because not everything, sometimes we just need to go inside of ourselves more. It's the one thing that we need to think about here is what anger does to us. Some people say that anger is like an expression sometimes of my emotions. Well, but sometimes we have to keep those emotions in check. And if we don't, then we're not going to stay in that alignment that we want to with ourselves. And so if we're not in alignment, then what are we doing? What are the experiences that we're having? We're moving backwards instead of forwards. We always want to be moving forwards, though, sometimes through our whole process of breaking down and being in anger, sometimes we do take a step backwards. And it's not saying you can't get back to where you were and you're a bad person for doing this, but you have to look at is anger is like self-protection for your subconscious. It's not self-sabotage. So many of us were taught that anger is bad. Anger is a horrible thing. You're not supposed to get angry with people, especially women. Were always told that you have to keep your anger in check. Empaths and spiritual seekers also, because as a spiritual person we're not supposed to lash out. We're not supposed to, we are always thought that we're always going to take the high road and we're not going to get angry and we're more Zen Buddha like than anything else. Well, just because we're spiritual seekers doesn't mean we don't have emotions. We haven't had a lifetime of solitude and reflection like the Buddhist monks do. So we're going to get angry. We're going to experience these things, but doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just a way of that you need to protect yourself sometimes, because it can be the soul's immune system. It helps you to say no more when needed. It's like, okay, I've had enough. You put up a wall, and that's what that anger is. It's a wall of saying no more. I'm not going to do it. So with that, you have to look deeper within that and find healthier ways to move through it. You need some, and like I talked about um, in the last episode, where you got to go scream it out, you got to go work it out, you got to get on that heavy bag and punch it out, whatever it needs to. These are healthy ways to move through it, even if it's turning on some music in your car and screaming it out, whatever it takes to, release that tension, release that anger. You just have to find a healthier way of doing it, because lashing out at the person and lashing out in certain manners is not going to be helpful to you or the goals that you have to be better and to honor yourself. But the one thing that we have to think about too is, what follows anger, and especially what follows anger when it's honored properly, when it's done through sacred means, where it's directional and we know where to focus and we understand it and we felt it and now we understand it. So when we're doing that, then we allow the anger to rise. You hear the wisdom that's coming from it, because that's you got to that point for a reason. So what is that wall? What is that protection that you're trying to put out? What is the wisdom that's beyond that protection? That's something that you have to look at. Sometimes it's often with grief, or fear, or a deep longing for whatever you're missing in life. Those are those sometimes where our anger comes from, is it's not necessarily that one thing that we're reacting to. It's that one thing triggers something else in the back of our mind, that's where what's triggering it. And so then now we're going to lash out, because now we have that unsettled part of ourselves, that past part of ourselves from the grief or the fear, or that sense of something missing in our lives, that's going through the same channel of anger. So it's always using that to channel itself, through your anger. So when you sit back and you're able to feel it and get through it, that's how we can move past it. Because we have to express our anger without burning our bridges or ourselves down at the same time. Because just because we get angry with someone doesn't mean that we aren't ever going to talk to that person. Doesn't mean we're not ever going to deal with that person. You know, it, we might find that this comes a lot of times with coworkers. I'm definitely there. Coworkers are sometimes some of our most aggravating parts of our day, because it's, but the next day you got to come back and deal with that person, or in a couple days, or in a week, whatever it might be. The problem is that you can't burn those bridges, because you're going to need to be able to still function within the realm of yourself and and interact with others. And so you don't want to burn yourself down at the same time. So that's why, I talked about earlier about fully feeling it, fully feeling everything. Don't bypass the emotion, but but don't always weaponize it. That's the bigger part of this too, is we don't want to bypass it, but we don't want to weaponize the emotion either, because that's when the lashing out and the anger gets the best of us, and then we're not living within an alignment to ourselves. So you got to give yourself the space to feel it. You got to feel it in your body. You got to feel it in your bones. You got to feel it from your head to your toes. Let that feeling envelop you, and then go, like I said, cry it out, scream it out, work it out, journal it, go move, go dance, whatever helps you get out your emotions, sometimes through some type of physical activity or mental activity, like journaling, something like that. You have to realize that your self-expression has to start in a safe containment. And so that's why I say you have to feel it, and then you have to give yourself a chance to feel it, and then move out to expressing it in some way through crying, screaming, working out, journaling, whatever it is that is going on. You don't always need to react right now. Just need to feel what's happening. So give yourself a chance to feel what's happening, because that's always going to be best. And then you have to, regulate before you can relate. By what I mean by that is, like I said, after you feel the emotion, breathe, ground, place your hands on your heart or on your belly, and just feel, why is this making me angry? To figure out if it's connected to a past bad thought in the back of your mind that's connecting. And then we need to move to deal with the anger and not let it take us over, and not let us have an explosion or have an outcry or an outpouring of emotions towards someone, because through this whole thing we also don't want to seem vulnerable in those types of situations that made us angry. So you just need to not let the anger get the best of you. Sit with it for a little while before you react, because you don't always need to react right away. It's nothing that you can, once it's happened, it's happened. You can't go back and change it. There's no rewind button. There's nothing that you can't do anything to get past it. But once you do sit with it and feel with it, then you can know your intention. What is your goal? Is your goal to be heard? Is it to be honest? Or is your goal to hurt someone? Because what are your intentions behind this anger? Because that's something that you have to feel. And then you have to center your truth and see if what you feel is in alignment with what you feel you need to do right by yourself. Anger becomes sacred when it's rooted in integrity, not in ego. Let me say that again. Anger becomes sacred when it's rooted in integrity, not in ego. So, you have to realize that though you might have been bested and that's what made you angry, or you were called out and that's what made you angry, you have to realize that you can't let that ego of yourself control the whole situation. That's why I say you have to step back and ground yourself, know your truth, feel the emotions before you react to them, because that's when you can speak out of turn. You can speak from a wounded place, and you don't want to speak from that wounded place sometimes, because that's when you weaponize things to be to be looked at that way. So you don't ever want to weaponize those. But what you do want to do is you want to set the boundary, then let go of control. So when I say that, you have to say to yourself, I won't allow this, or I won't allow that, or whatever. I won't allow, fill in the blank. You don't need to. You do not need to punish. You do not need to convince others, and you do not need to over-explain. You know your own truth. You don't need to explain your truth to others. Sometimes it's best to walk away and figure out another avenue before you let it get the best of you. Because anger is about truth-telling and protection, not domination. You can express your fire and still be a lover. You can honor your anger without becoming destructive. These are things that we have to remember to think about as we move through dealing with these anger, and being able to look into why this is happening, because then we also have to channel that anger and that rage into clarity and change. So we're moving through all these different steps. So next we have to, what is the rage revealing to us? What matters to the rage? Rage is like a sacred intel. It tells you exactly where your values live. Ask yourself, what is rage showing me that I can no longer tolerate. Again, it's about those boundaries and putting up those walls and figuring out where those boundaries and walls are, because sometimes we don't realize our own boundaries, especially as we're going through an awakening process, or we're getting more connected to, the divine, or into Pachamama, Mother Earth. These are things that we don't always know what our new boundaries are. So sometimes we're going to, get angry or get upset about things that maybe might not have upset us previously, but now they really do. And it's showing you what you will and won't tolerate any longer. Because underneath the rage is often a core wound, or a sacred message behind it, and that goes back to that thought that's in the back of our head, because we have that old wound from that grief or that fear that we've suppressed. And now, like I said in the last episode, those things are going to come back, and they're going to come back worse than before. And so those little things that upset us, now we're triggered, and now we're letting that grief or that fear from that previous thing that we suppressed come back through and give us that reactive, explosive rage and anger that we see. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So we just want to look and see what that anger and what that rage is trying to show us, what it's trying to tell us we no longer tolerate, where our boundaries are. Because like I said, it's always connected to a core wound within ourselves. Rage is not random. It's your soul screaming the truth. And that's one of the things that we really have to, remember here, is you don't want to suppress the rage. You don't want to, because that just leads to a faster path of depression or resentment, which then those things are going to come back fully later, like I said before, and they're going to probably come back and rear their head in a worse way. You have to realize that rage leaves you very raw. It leaves you extremely raw once you let that rage out, or you're in the middle of experiencing that rage, because that's when more emotions can put fuel on the fire and make things sometimes worse, because then we can't kind of get out of our own way, and we're letting that anger rule us and control us, instead of feeling the anger and letting it wash over us and feeling it, so that way we can find a better way to rage it out with, like I said before, the screaming it out, crying it out, working it out, journaling it out, whatever it takes for you. Sometimes you need to, with all this, you need to create yourself a sacred space to be able to sit in this, because that's, like I said before, after the rage, after the high emotions comes the stillness. And with that, that's where we kind of need to sit with ourselves, and we have our sacred space. And sometimes that sacred space is just, it can be our car when we're driving and we're screaming it out, we're crying it out, we're letting our emotions out, because that's when we get to be with ourselves, and we can and fully feel within ourselves if we want to. So it's all about what you want to do with that rage. Make that rage and that anger, make letting it out, make it a ritual. You can, primal dances, or like I said, make a rage journal, so that way you have your regular journal and then you have your rage journal. So that way you're always have a proper outlet for everything, because you can easily turn your heat into words and journal everything out. You can turn your heat into words and scream it out. You can turn your heats into words and cry it out. So just remember to always find the better way to let things, come in alignment with you, because you have to let it fuel your aligned action. Rage becomes power when paired with clear, aligned choices. So we have, again, this is where we're setting more boundaries, because now we found that boundary. So now we need to now we know what takes us to that point, and we know what brings us to that wall. So now we need to put those boundaries out. So sometimes that might be, when dealing with bad coworkers or bad work situations, that might be quitting the job. That might be starting a new project. That might just be speaking up for yourself or for others that you feel are malaligned or being treated unfairly. You don't need to wait for peace to act, but you do need to have a clear direction once you have those feelings. And that's why I say let it feel, align with it, and don't react right away. So, because the one thing that that rage teaches us also is it teaches us about sacred rebirth. It's the calm after the storm. It's after everything comes down and after we release all of this. This is the clarity that comes through. This is when the silence comes through. This is when we sit in our sacred space and we can do deeper meditations or just be able to think with clarity. You've burned away everything else that no longer serves you. You've raged out your emotions and those no longer serve you, and you've gotten them out, you've journaled them out, you've punched them out, whatever it is that you did. So now we can take and build from it. We can build from the ashes, we can build stronger, we can build truer, and we can build more free. So these are the things that we need to talk about, or these are the things that I'm talking about when I'm talking about, the rage that comes with everything and how that we can process this and how we can move through this to become more aligned with our true selves and more aligned with the divine and Mother Earth. So, the one thing that the one thing that I'm going to leave you with is your rage is not a flaw. It's a compass. Let it lead you to what's real. Set the boundaries. Put up the walls as you learn about yourself and the new ways that you're going about life and everything else, because everything is changing and you're relearning and renewing yourself. And that's why some of these, what I called rage rituals really help us, because it's the clarity that comes afterwards that we can live in, sit in, and be with one with ourselves and move through these things, not around them. We're not suppressing. We're going to move through them and conquer them head on, because that's the way through true alignment with yourself and with the divine. This has been Steve with Roots and Remedy. I hope you guys have a great day.